Your disbelief doesn't protect you, it only blinds you to what's already there.
Chapter 1: The First Letter. My name is James Grayson, and until last week, I was just another guy trying to make it through life. I live in a modest apartment in the suburbs of Seattle, work a 9-to-5 job at a small insurance firm, and spend my evenings binging TV shows I've already seen a dozen times. Nothing extraordinary ever happens to me. At least, that's what I used to think. The first letter came on a Tuesday. It was a damp, gray morning, the kind Seattle is known for, and I was already running late for work. As I rushed out the door, I noticed the envelope sitting in my mailbox. It was plain white, unmarked, with my name and address written neatly on the front in black ink. No stamp. No return address. I figured it was junk mail or some sort of flyer, but something about it made me pause. The handwriting, it looked like mine. Not exactly, but close enough to make me hesitate. Still, I shoved it into my bag and forgot about it until later that evening. After work, I finally remembered the envelope. Sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of reheated coffee, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in thirds. The message was short but unsettling. James, don't go to work tomorrow. Something terrible will happen. Trust me, I know. You. I stared at the note for a long time, my mind racing. Was this some kind of joke? A prank by a coworker? But how would they know my handwriting? And why go through the trouble? I checked the envelope again. No postmark, no sign it had been mailed. Someone must have hand-delivered it. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Was someone watching me? I glanced out the window, but the street was quiet, lit only by the faint glow of a street lamp. I told myself it was nothing, just a weird coincidence or a cruel prank. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. That night, I tossed and turned, the words of the letter looping in my mind. Don't go to work tomorrow. It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a bad thriller. But what if it wasn't? The next morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, debating whether to listen to the warning. On one hand, it felt absurd to let a mysterious note dictate my day. On the other hand, the message was so specific. And the handwriting, how could someone replicate mine so perfectly? In the end, I convinced myself it was all nonsense and headed to work. The day started off like any other. I answered emails, sat through a dull meeting, and joked with my coworker Lisa about how the coffee machine was probably older than both of us combined. By lunchtime, I had almost forgotten about the letter. Almost. I decided to step out for coffee, like I always did. My regular spot, a cozy little cafe across the street, was only a few minutes' walk from the office. I was halfway there when I realized I'd left my wallet at my desk. Annoyed, I turned back. That's when I heard it, a deafening crash, followed by the sound of glass shattering. I spun around just in time to see the aftermath. A delivery truck had veered off the road and plowed straight into the cafe. The front windows were obliterated, tables and chairs scattered like toys. People were screaming, running in every direction. My heart pounded as I stood frozen, unable to move. If I hadn't forgotten my wallet, I would have been inside. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, unable to focus. The image of the wreckage haunted me, along with the words of the letter. Something terrible will happen. How could someone have known? The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. That evening, I returned home to find another envelope waiting for me. This time, it was on my kitchen counter. I froze. My apartment was locked when I left that morning, and the windows were shut. No one should have been able to get inside. Yet here it was, another plain white envelope, identical to the first. My hands shook as I picked it up. The same handwriting, the same eerie familiarity. I opened it, my breath catching in my throat as I read the message. James, you didn't listen. Next time, it'll be worse. Pay attention. You. I dropped the letter as if it had burned me. My mind raced with questions. Who was doing this? How did they get into my apartment? And most terrifying of all, how could they know what was going to happen? I checked every door, every window, but nothing was out of place. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, except for the letter. It was as if it had appeared out of thin air. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I kept the lights on, my phone clutched in my hand, ready to call the police at the first sign of trouble. But nothing happened. The next morning, I was exhausted but determined. I decided to tell someone, anyone, about what was happening. Maybe Lisa, or even the police. But as I reached for my phone, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A third envelope was sitting on the coffee table. Chapter 2, The Signs Begin. I stared at the third envelope on the coffee table, my pulse pounding in my ears. I hadn't been near the table all morning, and I was certain it wasn't there when I went to bed. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt cold, almost damp, and the handwriting was the same as before, my own. I hesitated before opening it, bracing myself for whatever cryptic message lay inside. The words were simple, but they hit me like a punch to the gut. James, the clock is ticking. Watch for the signs. Don't trust anyone. You. I dropped the letter, the words echoing in my mind. Don't trust anyone. Watch for the signs. What signs? And how was I supposed to know who to trust? I spent the next hour pacing the apartment, replaying every detail of the past 2 days. The crash at the cafe, the letters, the eerie sense that someone, or something, was watching me. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was all some elaborate prank, but another part of me, the part that felt the weight of those words, wasn't so sure. At work, I tried to act normal, but I could feel the tension gnawing at me. Every sound felt sharper, every shadow longer. Lisa noticed my distracted state almost immediately. "Hey, James, you okay?" she asked, leaning against my desk with her usual easygoing smile. "You've been zoning out all morning." I hesitated. Lisa was one of the few people I trusted at work. She had a way of making even the most mundane days bearable. But could I really tell her about the letters without sounding insane? "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just didn't sleep well." She frowned. "You sure? You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. I opened my mouth to say something, maybe to confess everything, but before I could, a loud crash echoed through the office. Everyone turned toward the source of the noise. A stack of filing cabinets had toppled over, papers scattering across the floor. Lisa and I exchanged a glance. "Weird," she muttered. "Those things are heavy. They don't just fall over." I nodded, but my mind was racing. Was this one of the signs the letter had warned about? Or was I just letting my paranoia get the better of me? The rest of the day passed in a haze. By the time I got home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across my apartment. I locked the door behind me and double-checked the windows, making sure everything was secure. That's when I noticed it, the clock on the wall. It had stopped. The second hand was frozen in place, pointing directly at the 12. A chill ran down my spine. The clock had always worked perfectly. I tapped the glass, but it didn't budge. The time was stuck at 6 p.m., the exact moment I had walked through the door. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But then my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number lit up the screen. "Did you see it? The clock is just the beginning. You." My heart sank. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this wasn't just leaving letters anymore. They were watching me in real time. I typed out a reply, my fingers trembling. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" No response. The silence was deafening. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Lisa and asked if she wanted to grab a drink after work. I needed to talk to someone, and she was the only person I could think of. She agreed, and we met at a quiet bar a few blocks from the office. "So," she said, taking a sip of her beer. "What's going on? You've been acting weird lately." I hesitated, staring at the condensation on my glass. "You're going to think I'm crazy," I said finally. "But I've been getting these letters." "Letters?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "From who?" I shook my head. "That's the thing. They're from me. Or at least, they look like they are. They warn me about things before they happen. Like the crash at the cafe." Lisa's expression shifted from amusement to concern. "James, are you serious? That sounds crazy, I know," I interrupted. "But I swear, it's real. And it's getting worse. The clock at my apartment stopped yesterday, right when I got home. Then I got a text from whoever's doing this." She frowned, her eyes searching mine for any sign of a joke. "Okay, let's say this is real. What do you think it means? Why would someone send you these letters?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But the last one said not to trust anyone." Her face hardened. "Do you think I'd hurt you, James?" "No, of course not," I said quickly. "But I don't know what to think anymore. I feel like I'm losing my mind." Lisa reached across the table and placed a hand on mine. You're not crazy. We'll figure this out, okay? You're not alone. Her words were comforting, but as I looked into her eyes, I couldn't shake the doubt creeping into my mind. The letter had been clear: don't trust anyone. Was it possible that even Lisa wasn't who she seemed? That night, I returned home feeling more unsettled than ever. I locked the door and sat on the couch, staring at the stopped clock. The room felt heavier, the air thick with an unexplainable tension. Then I heard it, a faint tapping sound, like fingernails against glass. It was coming from the window. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I turned to look. The blinds were drawn, but the tapping continued, steady and deliberate. Gathering my courage, I approached the window and pulled the blinds aside. There was nothing there. Just the empty night sky and the faint reflection of my own face in the glass. As I turned away, my phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. You're not alone. They're watching. You. Let me know if you'd like to expand or adjust any part of this chapter. Chapter 3: The Rising Threat. The air in my apartment had grown colder, as if the walls themselves were leaching away any warmth. Sleep was a distant memory. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the stopped clock, kept me on edge. The letters and texts weren't just warnings anymore, they were a countdown to something I couldn't understand, but I knew was coming. It began in earnest the morning after the tapping at the window. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. Groggy and disoriented, I reached for it, expecting another cryptic message. Instead, I saw dozens of missed calls, all from Lisa. My stomach dropped as I sat up, my heart racing. I called her back, but it went straight to voicemail. A gnawing sense of dread settled in my chest. Lisa wasn't the type to panic, and the fact that she'd tried to reach me so many times in such a short span was alarming. Grabbing my coat, I left the apartment and headed straight to her place. Her apartment building was eerily quiet when I arrived. The kind of quiet that felt unnatural, as though the air itself was holding its breath. I knocked on her door, then again, harder this time. Lisa? It's me, James. Are you in there? No answer. The hallway lights flickered, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. I reached for the doorknob, and to my surprise, it turned easily. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. Lisa's living room was in chaos. Furniture was overturned, picture frames shattered on the floor. The air smelled of something metallic, and as I stepped inside, I saw why. There was blood, splattered across the walls, pooling on the carpet. My stomach churned as I followed the trail into the kitchen. There she was. Lisa. Her body was slumped against the counter, her lifeless eyes staring at nothing. A knife lay on the floor beside her, her hand stained red. No, I whispered, my voice cracking. No, no, no. I dropped to my knees, shaking her shoulders as if I could somehow wake her up. Her skin was cold to the touch, and the reality of what I was seeing hit me like a freight train. She was gone. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my shock. With trembling hands, I pulled it out and saw another text from the unknown number. "You weren't fast enough. This is on you. You." I screamed, hurling the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud, but the screen didn't even crack. The words were burned into my mind, taunting me. The police arrived not long after, alerted by a neighbor who had heard my shouting. They questioned me for hours, their suspicion evident in every word. I told them the truth, or at least, as much of it as I could without sounding insane. I said I'd come to check on Lisa after her calls and found her like this. They didn't seem convinced, but without evidence to the contrary, they had no choice but to let me go. By the time I returned to my apartment, the sun had set, and the shadows seemed darker than ever. The air was heavy, suffocating, as if the apartment itself was alive and watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened to Lisa wasn't random. It was connected to the letters, to the warnings. To me. That night, I dreamed of her. Lisa stood in the middle of a vast, empty field, her face pale and her eyes hollow. She reached out to me, her lips moving, but no sound came out. Behind her, the sky was dark and churning, as though a storm was about to break. Then I saw it, a figure emerging from the shadows. Tall, gaunt, its face obscured by a swirling mist. It moved toward Lisa with unnatural speed, its limbs jerking as if controlled by invisible strings. I tried to run to her, to warn her, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure reached her, its hands wrapping around her throat. She turned to me, her eyes filled with terror, and then her voice finally broke through the silence. "Why didn't you save me?" I woke up drenched in sweat, my chest heaving. The dream had felt so real, too real. My phone buzzed again, and I almost didn't want to look. But I forced myself to pick it up. It's not over. More will come. You. Over the next few days, everything spiraled out of control. The letters kept coming, each one more ominous than the last. My reflection in the mirror began to change, subtle at first, a flicker of movement that shouldn't have been there, a shadow that didn't belong. The people around me seemed different, too. At work, my co-workers whispered behind my back, their eyes darting toward me with suspicion. Even strangers on the street gave me a wide berth, as though they could sense the darkness that was following me. And then, the worst happened. My sister, Emily, called me late one night, her voice trembling. "James, something's wrong," she said. "I've been hearing noises in the house, footsteps when no one's there. And I found a letter. It's addressed to me, but it's in your handwriting." My blood turned to ice. "Emily, listen to me. You need to get out of there. Right now." "I can't," she whispered. "The doors won't open. And the windows," her voice cut off, replaced by a sound that made my skin crawl. A low, guttural growl, followed by a scream. "Emily!" I shouted into the phone. "Emily, are you there?" The line went dead. I drove to her house as fast as I could, running every red light along the way. When I arrived, the front door was wide open, swinging gently in the wind. The house was dark, the only sound the faint hum of electricity. "Emily?" I called out, stepping inside. My voice echoed through the empty halls. There was no response. But as I moved deeper into the house, I saw the signs: furniture overturned, picture frames shattered. Blood. The same scene as Lisa's apartment. A letter lay on the floor in the living room, its envelope stained red. I picked it up with shaking hands and opened it. "You can't save them. You can't save yourself. You." A shadow moved in the corner of my vision, and I spun around, my heart racing. The figure from my dream stood at the end of the hallway, its face still obscured by the swirling mist. This time, it spoke. "You brought this upon them, James. You brought this upon yourself." And then it lunged. Chapter 4: The Truth Revealed. The shadow lunged at me, and for a moment, time seemed to splinter. My body moved on instinct. I stumbled backward, knocking over a table as I scrambled to get away. My breath came in shallow gasps, and the figure loomed closer, its presence suffocating. "Stay away!" I shouted, though my voice cracked with fear. The figure paused, its swirling, featureless face tilting as if studying me. Then, in a voice that echoed with layers of distortion, it spoke again. "You already know, James. You've always known." The words froze me in place. My mind raced, grasping for meaning. What did it mean? What did I know? The figure stepped closer, and suddenly, the room shifted. The walls of Emily's house melted away, replaced by an unfamiliar space, an old, decrepit basement. The air was damp, filled with the stench of mildew and decay. Chains hung from the ceiling, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed in the distance. And then I saw it. A small, crumpled figure in the corner, bound and gagged. My stomach churned as I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a child, a boy, no older than 10. His wide, terrified eyes locked onto mine, silently pleading for help. "Do you remember now?" the figure whispered, its voice slithering into my ears like poison. I shook my head, backing away. No, this isn't real. This isn't me." But even as I said the words, fragments of memories began to surface. Flashes of the same basement, the same chains. My hands, younger and trembling, dragging the boy into the room. His muffled cries as I turned away, locking the door behind me. "No," I whispered, clutching my head. "That's not me. I wouldn't." "You did," the figure hissed. "You were just a boy yourself, but you made a choice. You let him die." The memories came flooding back, each one more vivid and horrifying than the last. I was 13. The boy's name was Peter. He was the new kid in the neighborhood, shy and awkward, an easy target for the bullies who ruled our school. I hadn't wanted to hurt him. I just wanted to fit in. The older boys had dared me to teach him a lesson, and I'd been too desperate for their approval to refuse. But things had spiraled out of control. What was supposed to be a harmless prank had turned into something darker, something I couldn't stop. I left him in that basement, promising myself I'd go back and let him out once the others had gone. But I didn't. Fear kept me away, and by the time someone found him, it was too late. I'd buried the memory deep, convincing myself it wasn't my fault. But now, standing in this twisted version of that same basement, there was no escaping the truth. The figure stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. "You've spent your life running from this, James. But you can't run anymore. The letters, the warnings, they were never from your future self. They were from me." I stared at it, my mind struggling to comprehend. "What are you?" "I am you," it said simply. "The part of you that you tried to bury. The guilt, the fear, the darkness. You thought you could hide from it, but I've always been here, waiting." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You're lying. This isn't real." "Oh, it's real," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "And now, it's time for you to pay." The room shifted again, and I was back in Emily's house. The bloodstains on the walls seemed to pulse, as if alive, and the air grew heavier with each passing second. The figure stood in the doorway, blocking my only escape. "Your sister, Lisa, they were just the beginning," it said. "Everyone you care about will suffer because of you. Just like Peter did." "Why?" I shouted. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you deserve it," it said, its voice cold and final. "You made your choice, James. Now, live with it." Desperation took over. I grabbed a broken chair leg from the floor and swung it at the figure, but it passed through as if it were made of smoke. The figure laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You can't fight me," it said. "I'm not something you can defeat. I'm a part of you." "Then I'll destroy myself," I said through gritted teeth. The figure tilted its head, as if considering my words. "Perhaps. But are you willing to pay that price? To lose everything, even the chance to make things right?" I hesitated, the chair leg slipping from my fingers. Could I undo the damage I'd caused? Or was it too late? The figure stepped closer, its voice softening. "There is another way. Embrace me. Accept what you did, and let me take control. Together, we can make them all pay." I stared at it, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me wanted to give in, to let the darkness consume me and end this nightmare. But another part, the part that still clung to the memory of Lisa's smile, of Emily's laugh, refused. "No," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "You don't control me. Not anymore." The figure's form began to waver, its edges blurring. "You can't escape me, James. I'll always be here." "Maybe," I said. "But I won't let you win." The room erupted in light, blinding and searing. I screamed as the figure dissolved into the air, its final words echoing in my mind. "You can't run from yourself." When the light faded, I was alone. The house was silent, the bloodstains gone. But the weight in my chest remained, a constant reminder of the truth I could never escape. I had faced the monster, and it was me. Chapter 5: The Final Price. The days after my confrontation with the figure passed in a haze. My apartment felt like a tomb, each shadow a reminder of the darkness I had faced, and the darkness still inside me. I hadn't heard from Emily, hadn't dared to check Lisa's empty apartment. It was as if the world had stopped, holding its breath, waiting for me to make my next move. But I didn't have a plan. I barely had the will to leave my bed. The figure's words haunted me, "You can't run from yourself." One night, as I sat in the dim light of my living room, staring at the blank TV screen, the doorbell rang. The sound jolted me, sharp and unexpected. I hesitated, every nerve in my body screaming to ignore it. But something compelled me to rise, to face whatever waited on the other side. I opened the door to find a package on the floor, wrapped in plain brown paper. There was no return address, just my name scrawled across the top in handwriting I recognized immediately. My own. Hands trembling, I brought it inside and placed it on the coffee table. For several minutes, I just stared at it, my mind racing with possibilities. Finally, I tore the paper away, revealing an old, leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed, the edges frayed, as though it had been through decades of wear. I opened it to the first page and froze. The words were written in my handwriting, but the date at the top was impossible, 30 years in the future. The entries were fragmented, chaotic, as if written by someone on the brink of madness. They detailed events I hadn't lived through yet, losses, betrayals, horrors that felt too specific to be fiction. Each page was filled with warnings, instructions, pleas to avoid certain places or people. And then, near the middle of the journal, I found a passage that made my blood run cold. "You think you've won, but it's not over. The darkness isn't something you can destroy, it's something you must carry. If you don't, it will consume everything and everyone you love." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I flipped through the pages, desperate for answers, until I reached the final entry. It was dated 1 week from today. "You'll make a choice, James. One that will determine everything. But remember, saving yourself means losing them. Saving them means losing yourself." I slammed the journal shut, my chest heaving. The figure's voice echoed in my mind, taunting me, "You can't escape me." The next day, I received a call. It was the police. They had found Emily. She was alive, but barely. They said she had been wandering the woods outside of town, covered in scratches and muttering incoherently. When I rushed to the hospital to see her, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window. "Emily," I said softly, stepping into the room. She turned to me, her eyes hollow. "It's still out there, James," she whispered. "It's not done with us." I sat beside her, taking her hand in mine. "I'll fix this," I promised, though I had no idea how. She shook her head. "You can't. It's too late." That night, I returned to the journal, searching for something, anything, that could help me. The pages seemed to shift under my fingers, the words rearranging themselves. I blinked, convinced I was losing my mind, but the message was clear. Go back to where it began. The basement. Peter. I didn't want to, but I knew I had no choice. If there was any chance of ending this, I had to face it. The house was abandoned, the windows boarded up, the yard overgrown with weeds. As I stepped inside, the memories hit me like a tidal wave. The laughter of the other boys, Peter's terrified cries, the sound of the lock clicking into place. I made my way to the basement door, my hand shaking as I reached for the knob. The air grew colder with each step, the darkness pressing in around me. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first, damp, rotting wood, and something else. Something foul. I descended the stairs, each creak of the wood echoing like a gunshot. At the bottom, the room was just as I remembered. The chains still hung from the ceiling, rusted and broken. The walls were covered in scratches, as though someone had tried to claw their way out. And in the center of the room stood the figure. "You came back," it said, its voice dripping with mockery. "I'm here to end this," I said, though my voice wavered. The figure laughed, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "And this? You still don't understand, do you? This isn't something you can end. It's who you are." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You're just a part of me. A part one can control." The figure tilted its head. "And what will you do, James? Sacrifice yourself? Or sacrifice them?" The journal's words flashed in my mind. Saving yourself means losing them. Saving them means losing yourself. I realized then what it meant. I could end this, but only by giving in, by becoming the darkness, letting it consume me so it wouldn't touch anyone else. "Choose," the figure said, its form shifting, growing darker. "Time is running out." I closed my eyes, the weight of the decision crushing me. I thought of Lisa, of Emily, of Peter. I thought of the life I had ruined, the people I had lost. And then, I made my choice. The figure smiled as I stepped forward, its arms outstretched. The darkness engulfed me, cold and suffocating, but I didn't fight it. I let it in, let it become a part of me. The last thing I heard was the figure's voice, now my own. "You can't run from yourself." When I woke up, the basement was empty. The chains were gone, the walls clean. The house was silent, as though nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. The darkness was still there, lurking beneath the surface. I could feel it, a constant presence in the back of my mind. I had saved them. But I had lost myself.
The shadows in the corner aren't watching you, they're waiting for you to see them.
The Talisman. Chapter 1, A Glimpse of Normalcy. It started like any other day in the sleepy town of Hartsville, Oregon. Nestled between dense, misty woods and a winding river, the town had a way of trapping people in its quiet rhythm. Life here wasn't extraordinary, but it was safe, predictable. That's what I liked about it. My name is Nate Harper, a 32-year-old carpenter who'd lived in Hartsville my entire life. The mornings smelled of fresh cedar and coffee, the afternoons of sawdust and varnish. My life revolved around my workshop, a small, dimly lit space on the outskirts of town. I built everything from kitchen tables to rocking chairs for the people I'd known since childhood. Each morning, I'd grab a black coffee from the diner across the street and settle into the comforting hum of sanders and saws. My dog, Jasper, a scruffy mutt I'd adopted years ago, would nap in the corner, his tail thumping occasionally in his sleep. That morning, everything felt routine. The sun filtered through the dusty windows of the workshop as I sketched designs for a custom bookshelf. Life was calm, almost idyllic. Later that afternoon, I met Lily Barnes, the local antique shop owner. She'd asked me to repair an old rocking chair she'd picked up at an estate sale. Lily's shop was a treasure trove of oddities: porcelain dolls with chipped faces, tarnished candelabras, faded photographs of people long forgotten. When I arrived, she was dusting a shelf cluttered with trinkets. "Morning, Nate," she greeted with a warm smile. "You're just in time. The chair's in the back." As I moved through the shop, something caught my eye: a small wooden box, intricately carved with swirling patterns. It sat alone on a table, its dark surface polished to a strange, unnatural gleam. "Interesting piece," I said, pointing to it. Lily glanced over her shoulder. "Oh, that? I just got it in some estate down near Salem. Supposedly it's cursed." She chuckled, rolling her eyes. "Cursed?" I repeated, intrigued. "Yeah, you know how people love a good ghost story. Apparently, everyone who owned it had something terrible happen to them. Lost a fortune, got sick, that sort of thing. Probably just an old superstition." I laughed, but something about the box held my attention. It wasn't just the craftsmanship, it was the way it seemed to pull at me, like it wanted to be noticed. I took the chair back to my workshop, but my thoughts kept drifting to the box. That night, as the town settled into its usual stillness, I found myself walking back to Lily's shop. The streets were eerily empty, the only sound my boots scuffing against the pavement. The shop was closed, but Lily lived in the apartment above. She opened the door, groggy but kind enough not to turn me away. "You really came back for that thing?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I don't know," I admitted. "There's just something about it." She sighed and handed it to me. "If it means that much, it's yours. Just don't come crying to me if your dog starts talking or your house burns down." I laughed it off, but as I carried the box home, a strange unease settled over me. Back at my workshop, I placed the box on my workbench and examined it under the light. The carving seemed even more intricate now, almost alive. My fingers brushed against a small latch on the side. Jasper growled low from his corner, his hackles raised. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked, but he wouldn't stop staring at the box. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a small talisman, an object I couldn't quite describe. It was metallic but seemed to shift colors under the light, its surface etched with the same swirling patterns as the box. The air in the workshop grew heavier, colder. Jasper whimpered, retreating further into the shadows. I felt a sudden rush of dizziness, as if the room had tilted. A sharp knock on the door broke the spell. It was Lily. She looked pale, her eyes wide. I think I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "That box, you need to get rid of it. Now." But it was too late. The talisman was already in my hand. Chapter 2, Whispering Shadows. The next morning, the air in Hartsville felt heavier, though I couldn't put my finger on why. Jasper had been restless all night, pacing the workshop and growling at shadows that weren't there. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination, his and mine. The talisman sat on my workbench, glinting dully in the morning light. I'd tried to put it out of my mind, focusing instead on the rocking chair Lily had brought me. But every time I glanced at it, I felt a strange pull, like it was demanding my attention. "Just a piece of metal," I muttered to myself, picking up my tools. Jasper let out a low whine from the corner, his ears pinned back. That day, things began to feel off. It started with small, almost laughable incidents. Tools I swore I'd placed on the workbench were suddenly on the floor, or missing altogether. A gust of wind knocked over a stack of wood planks, though the windows were shut tight. When I went to fetch a cup of coffee from the diner, the waitress, Molly, paused mid-sentence as she handed me the cup. "You okay, Nate?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "Yeah, why?" "You look different," she said hesitantly. I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. When I caught my reflection in the diner's window, I couldn't see what she meant. But for a split second, I thought the eyes staring back at me weren't entirely my own. That night, the noises began. The first sound was faint, like the rustle of leaves or a whisper carried by the wind. I was in bed, Jasper curled up at my feet. He perked up immediately, his ears twitching, his body tense. "Just the wind," I murmured, but I wasn't entirely convinced. The whispering grew louder, an unintelligible murmur that seemed to come from all around me. I turned on the bedside lamp, but the room remained still, silent. Jasper growled, his gaze fixed on the doorway to the workshop. My pulse quickened as I stood and crept toward the door. The workshop was dark, the faint smell of varnish lingering in the air. I flicked on the light, and everything appeared normal, until I saw the talisman. It had moved. I'd left it on the workbench, but now it lay on the floor, perfectly centered on the old rug. My skin prickled as I stared at it, the swirling patterns on its surface seeming to shift in the dim light. I picked it up, the metal cool against my skin. "How the hell did you get here?" I muttered, placing it back on the workbench. As I turned to leave, my reflection in the workshop mirror caught my eye. At first, it looked normal, just me, disheveled and tired. But as I stared, something shifted. The reflection lingered a fraction of a second too long after I moved. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. My reflection tilted its head ever so slightly, the way I hadn't. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, raising a hand. The reflection mimicked me, perfectly this time. "Get a grip, Nate," I whispered, tearing my eyes away. But the moment stayed with me. The next few days followed the same eerie pattern. Objects continued to move without explanation. The whispering in the night grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it felt like a presence, circling me, watching. Jasper's behavior grew stranger too. He refused to enter the workshop, no matter how much I coaxed him. He spent hours staring at the door, his hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his throat. I tried to rationalize it all. Maybe I was stressed, overworked. Maybe Jasper was picking up on my anxiety. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the talisman was at the center of it all. One evening, Lily stopped by to check on the rocking chair. She hadn't mentioned the talisman since she'd handed it over, but her eyes darted toward the workbench the moment she stepped inside. "You kept it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "It's just a piece of metal, right?" Lily didn't answer immediately. She walked over to the workbench, staring at the talisman as if it might spring to life. "Nate," she said finally, "I've been doing some reading about that thing. The stories, they're not just old wives' tales. People who've had it, they all said the same thing. It starts small. Little things you can explain away. But it gets worse. A lot worse." I laughed nervously. "You're scaring yourself. It's just a coincidence." Lily looked at me, her expression grave. "Maybe. But be careful, okay? If you start noticing things, don't ignore them." She left soon after, her words hanging heavy in the air. That night, I dreamed of shadows. They writhed and twisted, filling the room, their whispers deafening. In the dream, the talisman lay on my chest, its weight crushing me. I woke with a start, gasping for air. The workshop was dark, but something felt different. The air was colder, heavier. Jasper barked from the bedroom, a frantic, panicked sound. As I reached for the lamp, I heard it, a voice, low and raspy, right behind me. "You can't ignore me forever, Nate." I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was empty. The talisman sat on the workbench, its patterns glowing faintly in the darkness. Chapter 3: The Hero Faces True Horror. The moment I first realized that something was terribly wrong with this world wasn't dramatic or heroic. It was just an ordinary day, nothing special, except for the fact that I finally understood, this wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't stress, overwork, or intrusive thoughts. Something was truly threatening me, and perhaps even everything I once knew. The talisman on my workbench wasn't just reminding me of its presence, it seemed to demand my attention. And while I tried to push it out of my mind, I couldn't ignore what was happening around me. Every day, more and more things became inexplicable. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following my every move, my every decision. A few times, I tried to find a scientific explanation, even checked whether this could be some kind of psychological effect, but each time, I came to the same conclusion: this was something more than I could imagine. The talisman, and this place. My workshop had become the witness of something far darker than I could have ever anticipated. I realized it wasn't just following me. It was already here. The escalating danger. The night I finally understood that something sinister had broken into my life, it all started. Again, I woke up to that horrible noise, which seemed to come from inside my head. A rhythmic mumbling, impossible to explain. My pulse hammered in my temples as I heard the rustling tearing through the air, and I immediately understood, it wasn't just a dream. How I managed to get to the workshop, I don't remember. My steps were heavy, as if my legs no longer obeyed me. In the workshop, everything was dark, but through the window, I saw the light from the street lamp reflecting off the surface of the talisman. It began to glow faintly. When I got closer, it suddenly shone brighter. The unknown forces nearly paralyzed me, but even before I could take a step back, I saw it. A figure, or something that resembled a person, was standing in the corner of my workshop. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but its outline was far too realistic to be just an illusion. "You can't escape," the voice was low, a rasping whisper, reverberating through every cell in my body. I couldn't breathe, my gaze couldn't tear away from this creature. Something dark and otherworldly filled the space. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would break through my chest. Action and investigation. I couldn't leave this unanswered. Something big and ominous was standing before me, and it was my responsibility, either to unravel what this was or to be consumed by it. The first few hours were chaotic, and I didn't know what to do. But I realized, I wouldn't survive if I didn't understand what was going on. My hands were cold as I began searching for answers in the books I had collected over the years, trying to decipher all the mysteries of my craft. I spent days and nights looking for every mention of the talisman, of dark forces, of stories that might explain what I was experiencing. Eventually, I came across ancient records, broken pieces of manuscripts that described similar situations. And that was just the beginning. The talisman, as I learned, wasn't just a magical artifact. It was part of an ancient ritual that people once misused, seeking to empower themselves without realizing the price they would have to pay. These forces couldn't simply be controlled. The talisman bound its wielder to dark forces from other realms. This wasn't just a physical phenomenon. I could feel part of me drifting away from reality. From the moment I touched it, my body and soul began to change. I was no longer the person I once was. I couldn't tell if it was fear or the true process of transformation, but I felt that dark force sinking deeper into me, taking away my control. At that moment, I realized that the only thing I could do was destroy the talisman. But how? How could you get rid of something that had already become part of you? Chapter 4: Confronting the Horror. The Revelation of the Truth. I thought I had been unraveling the mystery bit by bit, trying to understand what had come over me, over this place, over the talisman. But the truth, when it hit me, was something far darker than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just the talisman, nor the strange, otherworldly entity haunting my workshop. It was me. The horror I had been running from, the evil creeping into my life, it had always been tied to me. I was the cause. The realization struck like a lightning bolt. I had done something years ago, something I thought was long buried in the past. A choice, a reckless decision, made in desperation, and I had never truly understood the consequences of my actions. I had been searching for answers, trying to find out who or what had cursed me, never suspecting that I was the one who had opened the door to the dark forces in the first place. The truth about the talisman came to light slowly, like a creeping fog. It wasn't just an object that could be controlled, it was an anchor, a beacon for the forces I had unleashed with my own hands. The ancient ritual, the curse, it all came back to me now. It wasn't merely a random act of fate. The talisman was a tool, yes, but it required a willing hand to wield it. And my hand had been the one that invoked it. The shadows in my workshop weren't simply haunting the place. They were drawn to me, to my soul, to my very essence. The darkness had taken root in me long ago, and now it was spreading, consuming everything I touched, everyone I cared about. It was me. I was the source. The complete collapse. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. The talisman wasn't just a cursed object, it had become my curse. I had thought I could control it, that I could fix everything. But I was wrong. I had become the vessel for something ancient, something far more powerful than I could comprehend. Jasper's behavior had been the first sign. His growls, his refusal to enter the workshop, the way he cowered from the very space I once found refuge in, all of it pointed to the truth. He knew before I did. He knew that something was wrong, that I was no longer the person he trusted. And Lily had warned me. But I hadn't listened. The workshop, the place where I had once created, had turned into the heart of the darkness. It pulsed with a malevolent energy, a force that was now too strong for me to fight. The talisman had grown stronger with every passing day, feeding off the fear I had tried to deny. The more I resisted, the more I struggled, the more it tightened its grip on me. It was no longer just a thing I could destroy or remove, it had become me. I could feel the evil within me now, pulsing like a second heartbeat. I had tried to fight it, to suppress it, but it was futile. Every attempt to rid myself of the talisman, to banish the dark presence that had taken over, only seemed to strengthen its hold. I couldn't even escape it in my own thoughts. And then, it happened. I had gone to the workshop one final time, hoping to find a way to destroy the talisman. I had tried everything, destroying it, hiding it, leaving the town, but nothing worked. It always found its way back to me, always pulled me back to the place where it all began. I was trapped. As I stepped into the workshop, the shadows seemed to gather around me, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. They clung to my skin, crawling beneath it, filling my lungs with their foul breath. I could feel it, the darkness, the weight of it, suffocating me. I tried to turn back, but the door slammed shut behind me. The talisman lay on the workbench, glowing brightly now, almost alive. Its patterns were shifting and twisting, becoming more intricate, more dangerous. It was calling to me, urging me to take it once more, to complete the final step. I reached for it. But this time, there was no hesitation, no fear. I wasn't fighting it anymore. I was part of it. My fingers closed around the cold metal, and in that instant, I knew. It was too late for redemption. The darkness had already won. The last thing I remember was the scream, mine, I think, rising in my throat, echoing in the workshop, as the talisman's power consumed everything around me. The shadows surged forward, engulfing me, pulling me into the void. I don't know how long I was lost in that darkness, in that abyss. Time had no meaning there. When I finally came to, I was no longer alone. The town of Hartsville was gone. The world I had known was gone. And I had become the monster I had tried so desperately to escape. The evil that I had unleashed had spread, just as the ancient texts had warned. It was no longer contained, no longer bound to a single object or a single soul. It was free. And now, there would be no stopping it. I had failed. And the world would pay the price.